Morgan Ortagus, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
I have a lot of things to talk to you about, but first off, it's been an eventful year for you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I have to admit my frustration from afar, feeling things for you in terms of your congressional situation. How do you feel about that, how it played out, and what's your attitude generally towards it?
Well, my attitude about politics is it's like the NFL. And so if you can't take a hit, don't get in. So I've been around politics a long time, as have you. I had to, I was working for President Trump and Mike Pompeo during the president's first impeachment, had to brief through that. So I've been through a lot in my career, and I understand that politics is a nasty business. I never sought to run for political office before. I just didn't think I was a candidate, and was recruited and asked to do so, including by the former president, and thought, okay, why not? And I knew, by the way, I didn't think it was guaranteed that I would win. I thought I have to work really hard, raise a lot of money. But I thought there's no shame in running and losing or going for it, winning. You just work hard and see. So I went into it with just I think the right attitude was, let's work really hard. Let's try this. Let's be competitive. I never in a million years would have expected that people, especially in the Republican Party, could rig a ballot, not just against me. I mean, they basically took the top people that would have been the top vote getters, made up excuses to throw them off the ballot so that a couple local people that it was their turn that deserved it. So it was more fresh. I would have taken a loss with grace and said, okay, I tried, it's hard. A lot of people run for office and lose their first time out. I think I could have handled that. It was very frustrating that our own party is involved in ballot rigging. But, like I said, at the same time, I'm like, well, this is politics. It's nasty. And when I look at the scheme of things, I have a really great life. Like, I've served at the highest level of a Republican administration. I could have only dreamed to have that job. I have an amazing husband, a beautiful daughter, a great life in Nashville. And I was back on TV 2 seconds after they rigged the ballot. So, and I have the kind of platform that, I've always dreamed of having. So I feel very lucky and very blessed for the things that I have in life. And listen, I got right back on the campaign trail. I started a C4 and a PAC based on national security. We're educating candidates. We're going to start campaigning for them. So I'm going to be a part of taking back the Republican majority, hopefully in the House and the Senate. It's in a different way than I expected I would be in February, but I'm still going to be a part.
There's always that challenge of when someone who has worked so hard as a staffer and as someone driving policy and communications and things within an administration or on Capitol Hill tries to make that jump into electoral battles. Just in terms of your own attitude towards it, do you think that this is something that really is kind of a sign that there's a whole crew of people who are, we're the same age, who ought to basically start making that jump, start thinking of themselves as leaders, as opposed to just being the person who sits behind the guy in the chair?
Yes, I think everybody should try to run. I learned so much. It was a great experience for the 6 to 8 weeks that I did it. But yeah, we need more people. It's hard, right? You put yourself out there, you put your family out there, you put your career out there. So there's a lot of things that are difficult about it. But and everyone I think has different callings. But there is, I think there's no shame in running. And if you don't win, try next time, right? I mean, I think President Bush, President Obama. I mean, if you start going President Clinton, you start going through the list, people lose elections. That's fine. But that shouldn't deter you, I think, from running and trying. And I think it's important. I do think the party has fundamentally changed in that, we don't want people that are squishy. We want people that are going to be loud, strong, proud conservatives. Because we're fighting in this, it sounds a little existential, but we're fighting, I think, Ben, almost a communist ideology in many ways in this country, this orthodoxy of say exactly, what we expect you to say. And if you don't, you're canceled. And it's very frightening when you start to listen to many people who came from other countries, whether it's so many Hispanic Americans that I know who came from communist or socialist countries, or you talk to, friends who came, who they or their families came from communism or socialism in Eastern Europe. when you start hearing those stories and look at the way, the way the modern left operates, what I do is I feel like, okay, I have a platform. I'm not worried about what they say or do, because you can't say anything that hasn't already been said about me. So I no longer care. But I worry about young people, average small business owners, just normal people in America who feel like they have to hide their faith or their political beliefs. We're at a scary point in America. And so I just sort of felt like, as a mom, you guys are new parents. I'm a new mom as well. I just sort of felt like, I'm going to stand out there. I'm going to speak up, and I'm going to fight for my daughter to be able to think and feel and believe anything she wants in this country, because that's what we're founded on.
Part of what you just mentioned there was about how the party has changed. One area where it's obviously changed in a lot of respects, partially due to President Trump, but also I think that he was just kind of an expression of it, is within the conversation around foreign policy and national security. So there's some interesting things that are happening because of that. One of them is there's this fight going on, it seems like, within the Republican coalition about defining what an America First foreign policy means. Obviously, your old boss is a big part of defining that. There are other new voices as well. Senator Hagerty, for instance, is someone who's becoming more prominent on these issues.
He's great. Love him. He should be a Secretary of State, by the way.
I think that there are a lot of people who will consider him for that. But as you see this kind of reflected out, how do you define it in your own mind? And when you hear people basically say things like, the 18 Republicans who voted against allowing Finland and Sweden into NATO, even though it's just a resolution, so it doesn't really mean anything. What do you say to them when they make the argument, oh, well, allowing these new nations in, it's entangling alliances, it's not America first, et cetera, et cetera?
So first of all, I think that the debate is good. Right. It's important to have, especially, our generation, Ben, over the last 20 years, people have done multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. While I am a reservist in the military, I've been in and out of both countries as a civilian, many times doing work there. And it's very easy to slip into 20 years of war. Right. It's super easy. So I think I never shy away from the debate. I think it's really important. I do think post-presidency, some people are trying to define America First foreign policy in a way that it actually wasn't. And what I look at what President Trump tried to do, and my old boss, Mike Pompeo, has said this before, is every administration has their guiding principle, the fundamental guiding principle from which all decisions are made. For better or worse, I would argue worse, the Biden administration's, their guiding principle is climate change. So when they look at China, for example, and they have to make decisions, and you have to make hard choices, you do have to make trade-off decisions in foreign policy. When they make it on China, they choose climate change over human rights. So for us in the Trump administration, the president told us America first. And so what does that mean? That means every decision that we look at is, what is the best thing here for the American people? Are we putting the American people first with this foreign policy decision? So I actually think that Trump America First foreign policy is taking us back to what Reagan foreign policy was. And we got away from that, right? The Cold War ended. We sort of became the world's only superpower. And in a way, it's sort of like the dog catching the car, right? Yeah. Like we had so much responsibility, so much to do. And while the fight against Islamic extremism and terrorism, especially after 9/11, was incredibly important, we ended up in situations that I don't think Ronald Reagan or President Trump would have gotten us in. So people who think that, in my opinion, people who think Donald Trump is an isolationist have it totally wrong. What what he wanted to do with NATO, for example, you brought it up, is he looked at it and he said, well, wait a minute. If this is going to be a real alliance, it needs to have teeth. And that means everybody committed to this 2%. So everyone needs to actually pay into it, right? So if we're going to say that we're going to be a counterweight to to Russia, you remember in 2018, whenever he looked at all of them, including the Germans, in the face and said, but you're totally dependent on them for your energy. Like, this isn't serious. So he talked about a lot of things that, are supposedly you're not supposed to talk about, but I think he was right. I think having an alliance in name only, our enemies see right through that. And even when you look at President Trump, he did not get us involved unnecessarily in any wars by putting boots on the ground, but he did not hesitate to take out al-Baghdadi. He did not hesitate to take out Qasem Soleimani, which, by the way, everybody said you can't do. right? He didn't hesitate to make bold decisions like moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Afghanistan, Pompeo, we very famously negotiated to deal with the Taliban. I do not think that we would have. I do think we would have exited, but we would not have done it the way half-handed way this administration did, which resulted in the lives taken of 13 American service members. So a Trump America First foreign policy, I think, takes us back to the peace through strength, which is we're not seeking a fight. We're not going to commit American men and women unnecessarily or for prolonged terms, but we're certainly not afraid to to throw a punch. And if we're going to be a part of alliance, let's make it a real alliance. By the way, the Quad, which is the alliance in Asia, that was started in the Bush administration. For all the talk about the pivot to Asia, it basically went dormant for 8 years under Barack Obama. And Trump is the one who revived the Quad meetings and that, meeting of like-minded allies in Asia. So I see plenty of instances where President Trump invested in relationships, in partnerships, and in with our allies, but he just wanted it to be real. He wanted them to have as much skin in the game as we have, and I think that's fair.
The one aspect of this that I think, you obviously are seeing under President Biden is a return to a lot of the approaches taken by, the junior members of the Obama administration when it comes to a lot of different fronts. Talk to me about the biggest concerns that you have about those issues and, in particular, as it relates to his most recent trip to the Middle East.
Well, I think Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon. I mean, who's stopping them? Maybe the Israelis if we let them, right? But I don't think, does anyone, I was glad to hear President Biden say to the Israeli journalist that, the use of force was on the table to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I don't know how much I actually believe it. I don't know how much they believe it. Right. So I think that the Middle East is in a dangerous place. We handed them a peaceful Middle East. Right. They could not believe it, but we got the Abraham Accords, 4 peace deals, the first in 26 years between Israel and Arab states. And so we saw them exchanging trade, ambassadors, opening embassies, doing all these things that I did not think I would see in my lifetime, having worked in the Middle East and been overseas. So we saw all of these things, happen because we just did something very simple, which is we looked at the Middle East and we said, you know what, we're going to reward our friends and allies and punish enemies. And isn't it interesting that we all have a common enemy? Perhaps we can unite around that. I mean, you don't need a PhD in foreign affairs, in international relations to figure out the chess game here. So I do worry about the Middle East I worry about Iran getting a nuclear weapon unless Israel stops it. And I worry about it because if you were a Gulf Arab state, why in the world would you hesitate to get your own weapon if they have one, right? Especially given the recklessness of the regime. I also similarly worry about Taiwan and China. So I think if you're if you're Xi Jinping, you're the Chinese leadership, you're facing a bad economy because, of COVID, you have lockdowns in the country. Unemployment is actually not great. I think incredibly low, historically low, I think, amongst young people in China. The vaccine didn't work there. I mean, I know people have issues with our vaccine here. Theirs really didn't work. And so you have a lot of institutional problems. So if you're Xi Jinping and you're facing major economic headwinds and some domestic unrest and protests at home, and you have to make a gamble of who are you going to have to deal with in 2025, and maybe it's Trump or Ron DeSantis or Pompeo or whomever, someone who's, let's just say, for sake of argument, someone who's going to be much tougher with them over Taiwan. Versus dealing with this current administration, I might take the gamble, and pursue military action over the next 2 years. I hope that doesn't happen. Listen, I hope I'm wrong. But, if you want to do it in 7 years, why wouldn't you do it in the next 2 whenever you have a pretty weak administration? Then there's always North Korea. I mean, they're just the pain on everyone's side. No administration has figured this out. They're a threat to, the homeland. And we pretty much don't take North Korea seriously until something blows up.
The China conversation. I hear from, a lot of the strongest voices on Capitol Hill, including Senator Hagerty, including people like Mike Gallagher in the House, that they're very concerned about the state of the American military, the state of the American Navy, and their level of preparedness when it comes to actually taking on a Chinese threat or being able to deter them from going after Taiwan. Obviously, Taiwan is a different situation than Ukraine. You can't, as difficult as it's been to get weapons and material and resources to Ukraine, it would be even harder when it comes to Taiwan.
But the F-35s won't even work in that fight.
Yes.
I'm glad we spent all that money.
Yeah, and that's a situation where I think there's a lot of concern right now that we're not doing things now that would make them, make them the prickliest porcupine that they can be. As China looks at them, right? What does it take in terms of leadership at this moment to change that? And do you think that, whoever ends up running for president in 2024 needs to really make that a priority in terms of the conversation that they have with voters on the campaign trail to say, we have to invest in this so that China doesn't basically take over and run the world?
And by the way, we're getting to the point that we're getting to the too late point, right? Yeah. We're not there, but do you know Bridge Colby?
I do.
We obviously worked together in the Trump administration, very good friend of mine.
We've talked to him on this program before.
Bridge and I just had coffee. We go to coffee and I hope no one's listening to us when we go to coffee because we sit around and talk about what's happening, will the Chinese beat us? It's a very depressing conversation and a rather odd one normally when he and I are together. I always tell Bridge that he's John the Baptist talking about this and he needs to keep it up because it is very, very easy to get distracted by everything going on in the world and to not have your focus there. I think that the Biden administration still thinks that they're living in the 1990s. It's a very sort of Clinton administration view of the world. And they haven't realized how much the world has changed, right? So you and I started at the beginning.
It's like they're stuck on Fukuyama. They're stuck on the idea that history ended.
Yes.
So
what you and I said at the beginning, that after the Cold War, Clinton comes in, has this era of, quote unquote, peace and prosperity. And I feel like this administration and the Democrats writ large are still there. They don't realize how much the world has changed. We don't have I can tell you, my friends in the DOD, especially, the guys who work Asia, every time they joke, every time the Middle East sneezes, there's any aircraft carrier that they want, and we always conveniently have excuses and reasons that we don't actually pivot to Asia. We have to make trade-off choices. Look, the Chinese Navy is bigger than ours. It is. It's like we're no longer the world's largest Navy today. And now one could argue about quality and, you could have all of those, with Mike Gallagher and others, you can have all of those arcane discussions, but their Navy is bigger than ours today. They are spending, they're aggressive, they have their plan in sight. And, I think, I want to say we keep getting distracted because I do think it's important to make sure, that I'm going to word this carefully because I'm sure the Russians and the Chinese are listening. I've never thought we should have boots on the ground in Ukraine. That's not an American responsibility. And I also think we need to have much, much more robust oversight for the funding and the aid. And I think that every dollar that we send, we should tell the Europeans, you match it and then we send the rest, right? So everyone should be in the fight together. So we can't ignore Ukraine, right? We can't ignore challenge. We can't ignore Iran. We can't ignore problems around the world because we want to focus on Asia. But at the same time, we can't let them consume us from a resource perspective. We are sending a lot of military aid to Ukraine, and we're getting to the point that we need a real plan for, how is this replaced in real time? My problem, with the Biden administration is that, again, I think they live in this 1990s view of the world where we have, all the money, all the time, all the power, and we don't. We have to make trade-off choices now, as Bridge Colby talks about even better than me in his book. We have to make those real trade-off choices, but also everything is a communications exercise for the Biden administration. So what do I mean by that? Pompeo and I would often, talk about what we would say because people would want him to lean in. And he would always say to me, Morgan, we can't say more than we're actually able to do. So when everything was going on with Lukashenko and Belarus, for example, people wanted us to be really forward-leaning, which we were. I mean, we certainly condemned the behavior. But Pompeo always said, I'm not going to get out and say things that I can't back up, that this administration isn't prepared to back up. And so what Biden does is you see at least 4 times, I've counted, I think it's 3 or 4 times since he's been president, he's had these gaffes that the White House has to walk back, where he essentially implies that militarily we're going to fight for, Taiwan and sort of doing away with the strategic ambiguity policy that's been there. Well, if that's a decision of his administration, that's fine. I think it's more of just verbal diarrhea from him. But the problem is that the rhetoric doesn't match the budget, doesn't match the reality. His defense budgets that he keeps submitting don't even meet inflation. So you're not serious about countering China and fighting for Taiwan whenever they can look at the same defense budget that the rest of us can. So again, my problem, because a lot of conservatives were like, yay, they got excited when Biden said that about Taiwan. I said, well, first of all, it's just verbal diarrhea. It's not a policy change. So I don't like that he said it unless we're actually rolling out a new policy. And number 2, well, put your money where your mouth is, right? Let's have a defense budget then that realistically reflects that we're preparing to fight and win a war with China. I don't want to go to war with them, but we should learn the lesson from President Reagan and do everything we can to prepare to win if we need to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes sense.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. With the time we have left, I want to talk to you about the state of the American military. The perspective that you have on it, as both someone who's lived within this policy space, understood it from the perspective of your work at State, but also someone who is a reservist herself. There is so much that I hear from people who are in the American military today that sounds so depressing and disappointed and frustrated by the decisions that are being made, frustrated with the state of flag officers, frustrated with the priorities of the brass in Washington, and a real feeling that there's a political class at the top that is out of step with the needs of the moment and is basically compensating for that by behaving in a way that is super woke, designed to appeal to liberal pieties and make sure that they can get that chair at Raytheon when they get out.
Yeah, I think we could cut flag officers by half, right? And I don't know that anyone would notice a difference. I think what you're saying is the sense of people being demoralized, and I think that's right. I feel that, especially there was even a sense at one point of, are they looking at our social media to determine if we're criticizing Biden? Am I going to get in trouble, for that? So it's also an interesting new era for the military in that, so if you look at the people, the friends, people our age that did multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, those people are, now 04s, 05s, 06s, or they're retired, right? And so the younger generation of enlisted and the younger officers are not growing up. They didn't have that common experience that we all had together with 9/11, which unified us, which I, very silly, thought I wanted to be an opera singer and said, no, I'm going to go fight for my country. I'm going to go serve.
I want to write for National Geographic.
You do? Oh, that actually still sounds fun. Maybe we could go back to, I'll go back to opera singing and you go to Nat Geo. So the new people, well, first of all, we have a big recruitment problem. I mean, the New York Times, I was just reading on Saturday, and it breaks my heart to read it. Now, obviously, the military, during economic times when you have a lot of job openings, it's not abnormal for the military to have periods where it's difficult to recruit. But I fundamentally think that, something feels rotten to the core. And if you tell people that this is an awful nation, it's a racist nation, it's a white supremacist nation, there's nothing to be proud of, we need to, burn down the Constitution, we need to rip down, police stations and rip down every institution, we need to pack the court, to do away with, when you tell young people this is actually, you were told this is the greatest country in the world to live in. Actually, this is the most racist country in the world. I mean, that's how incredibly stupid from someone like there's an ongoing genocide against Muslims in China. But okay, whatever. But when you're told something is
the West is decadent, haven't you heard?
When you're told that a country is rotten to the core, well, why in the world would you want to fight for it? And so you have, people are serving whose parents or grandparents were in, and, and that's wonderful. But like, where is the national call to arms that we all felt after 9/11? And we don't have that unifying moment. And I think, what you have seen at the Pentagon is way too big, way too bloated. But and yes, like I said, I do believe you could cut the flag officers in half. But look at the civil service at the Pentagon. I mean, we have created, and not just the Pentagon, but around Washington, D.C., you can't fire these people, so you have this permanent class that sits at these institutions in DC that are there, whether Republicans, Democrats, they don't care who it is. They're the ones actually running the show. We political appointees think we come in and run the show. We don't run the show. It's the permanent bureaucratic class. So this will never happen. But my pie in the sky dream is that when Republicans get all three branches, because the Democrats will never agree to this, is that we do civil service reform so that you can actually hire and fire, and this is not, a permanent ruling class, a permanent unelected ruling class in Washington. I don't think McCarthy and McConnell are going to take me up on this, but this is my pie in the sky dream.
No, I think it's great to have dreams, and I think that's a great dream. Morgan Ortagus, thank you so much for taking the time to
Thanks for having me.